All right, well, looks like we have 48 participants who have signed on and are letting us know where they are calling in from all over the place, Canada and the Outer Banks and Florida, from all around the North America here. We're pleased to have you with us at this Serving Through Song webinar, the third in a series, and we're really excited to have Tom Trenney with us, talking about sacred collaboration, the holy ground of doing ministry together. And just by way of a quick introduction, Scripture assures us that whenever two or more are gathered, Christ is in our midst. But often when two or more worship leaders are gathered, conflict and concern can be in our midst as well. Tom will be sharing stories and ideas to help us nurture and sustain positive relationships with pastors, choir members, congregants, and colleagues as we live into our calling to music ministry. Just by way of a brief note, this webinar is being recorded. Your comments also are welcome, and questions, especially regard to the topic that I just spoke to. And we can drag those comments onto the screen to address at various times during the course of the webinar. So please freely use the comment feature, and we'll be looking through those to see what we can do to spice up this conversation with some of your thoughts as well. Let's talk about our panelists a little bit, shall we? Composer, conductor, organist, preacher, and teacher, Tom Trenney has been blessed to serve as a minister of music to First-Plymouth Church in Lincoln, Nebraska, and that's been since 2009. In 2019, Tom was invited to become the Associate Professor of Music and Director of Choirs at Nebraska Wesleyan University, where he now holds the Susan Sehnert Stuart Professorship in Choral Music. A graduate of Cleveland Institute of Music and the Eastman School of Music, Tom has been a featured performer at churches, colleges, and concert halls across the country. David Sims is the Music Development Manager at Augsburg Fortress, where he directs development and production of choral, instrumental, and assembly song resources. He has served as cantor at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Minneapolis and has worked previously as an organ builder and church musician in Indiana. David grew up in the cornfields of Central Illinois and holds degrees in church music and organ performance from St. Olaf College and Indiana University. His compositions are published by Augsburg Fortress and GIA, and you can usually find him on the search for a new hymn text, recipe, or a source of coffee. Well, speaking of grounds, pardon the pun, let's talk about the holy ground of doing ministry together. And at that, Tom and David, I'll leave the conversation to the two of you.
Thank you so much, David. So in school, music school, we learn to care for the music itself. Like, how do we faithfully represent what's on the page, or how do we take this text and bring it to life? In practice, though, we end up caring for the people as much as we care for the music itself, whether those are professional musicians or the members of your church or the members of your congregation, or you yourself as the person who's playing. So my question to you, Tom, is was there a time that you realized that caring for people is just as important as caring for the music itself?
Oh, wow. Thanks. First of all, it's so good to be with you, David, and to our friends that are with us. Yeah, I can remember, I was a conservatory student growing up, and I was kind of a people-pleasing student, I think, generally a teacher pleasing student, so that my understanding of music, even as I was getting through graduate school, was that a teacher gives you some sort of challenge, and then you figure out how to work hard enough and practice hard enough to meet that challenge, and then you get a new one and that sort of thing. And when I first started to work in a church during those years, I realized pretty quickly that not everybody who came to be in the choir or to play in the bell choir with me had exactly that same history and spirit of necessarily having this idea that all that we did was strive towards somehow, in some ways I've discovered there are kind of arbitrary goals of what success might be like. And it was from getting to know the people that were there with me in the choir that that came from their busy lives of taking care of aging parents and young children and having to work multiple jobs and all of these stresses. That I was young enough that I didn't know a lot about a lot of those yet. And when I started to realize what these people were coming to experience, the community that they loved and treasured with being with their friends, and the fact that they could sit for a moment and breathe in beauty, and to have words of hope on their minds and in their mouths, and pouring from their hearts, and to be able to have some expressions of faith to help them have the confidence to make it through a day. Like I can say it with those people in that early choir room, that really helped me figure out what music ministry was about. That was something I didn't learn in school, to be honest with you. And I think another piece of that, a lot of people who might even know me a little bit know that Mr. Rogers is my spiritual superhero. And the title of this program today that we're doing is we've stolen a little bit of his inspiration in talking about holy ground. Not that it was original to him, but his when he was first coming home from college one summer as a student, his family had gotten a new TV, and in those days, television was new. It was the first time he had seen such a thing, and he happened to see an early program that was supposedly for children, where people were ridiculing each other, making fun of each other, pushing each other down the stairs, putting pies in faces, and people laughing at each other. And he absolutely hated it. But he had this idea that this, what would happen if we thought of the space between the television set and the child, what if we thought of that as being holy ground? And I think a lot about that still now, of, the space between the organist and the congregation, or the choir director and the choir, or the accompanist and the director, the pastor and the congregation, the pastor and the colleagues on the staff, right? The worship and music committee and the the staff, all of those things, even things like the Uber driver and the passenger. How can we, in the way that we inhabit our lives, think of that as a relational thing, and how does that change what our expectations and what our understandings of success are? And so that's kind of a long answer to your short question of I think the framing of all of this, as I've come to experience it and hope to live into, and in the way I do what I do.
Mhm. How do you define success? That might change based on long-term goals or short-term goals.
Mhm.
But if you say this was a successful Sunday or a successful choir rehearsal, or what does that look like to you, and how do you
Yeah.
prepare for that?
Yeah, I think, you know, there are different kinds of accomplishment, and we have to be aware of that. So, theoretically, someone could come into the choir and yell and carry on and make a fuss and shout and have a temper tantrum to get people to get some notes right. And they could leave thinking that that was a success. But I'll bet you, to most of the people in the room with them, it didn't feel like much of a success. Maybe they knew a few more notes, but they're not going to go home feeling particularly good about it.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think I've leaned a lot on the quote that I'll never forget from Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said and people will forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel.
Mhm.
And if we can feel good about the way we go about doing whatever it is we do, that's a success in and of itself. I mean, think about how much pressure people are under. Think about how much negativity there is, particularly in these perilous moments in our discourse and in our bigger culture. And we have this opportunity to curate these sacred spaces to till this holy ground, and to help people kind of remove themselves from all of that, to feel that they could be valued and trusted and invited, to do something that's meaningful. And I think that in some ways that's hard to put on a chart. It's hard to quantify in a certain way, but you can absolutely tell when it happens and when it does not happen. And I think we all need to give ourselves permission to know that that feeling is indeed a great sign of success. And all of that's to say, our experience of God is as much in the practice and in the pursuit as it is in the performance or the service, so to speak. It's all holy ground.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a royal waste of time, right? In that sense, that it's not there's not a goal or a product that this leads to. It's the doing of it that
Yeah.
is magical and
Well,
holy.
and I mean, overall, it in any case, should our goal ever be just to become better robot musicians that can do certain things, or isn't it that music is the way or a way as we do it to become more aware of our own abilities to be compassionate and empathetic and caring and giving and loving and gracious and all of all of the things. And so when we would try to get some sort of results using other forces than those, it seems to me counterproductive. The that that is something that's been important to me, and something I don't remember exactly the moment I realized how important it was, but I knew as soon as I did, and
Yeah. Yep. I think sometimes I feel like I have to be a slightly different person in front of a choir versus with my colleagues as pastors. I'm representing different parts of music ministry in those moments, and each of those groups can be challenging. Sometimes there can be friction, even though if we're all working toward the same goal, that can be difficult. Do you? Do you have instances or ways that you think about relating to the choir and maybe some personal struggles there, and how that might be different from how you deal with minister colleagues that you have a different kind of relationship with?
Sure. Yeah, that's an interesting question. When when you're a music minister of music and you're dealing with the choir, then you're sort of in charge in those moments, right? And so that presents a different opportunity. However, sometimes when we're working with colleagues, we have to provide counterpoint, don't we, to
Hmm.
other themes that may be emerging. And so, it, if we think about some of those things, I remember, for example, a funny story. I think, let me just say, I think self-assessment is an awareness is a big part of how we can more successfully inhabit those kinds of situations. But just a quick story, that first church I was telling you about it, that I worked at in grad school, we had a very sort of bossy pastor there, and he wasn't mean, but he was just very bossy. He didn't, I don't think he even realized how little he was listening to potentially other solutions and ideas in the rooms he was in. And so for some reason, in spite of that quality, he decided we would have a staff retreat, and he brought someone in to facilitate the retreat. And I'll never forget, the first activity was that we were all supposed to sit down and we were going to put blindfolds on, and there was a piece of rope that we had to work together to get with the blindfolds on to get from being in a straight line to be in a circle. And it was timed, and so as soon as the facilitator put the clock on, the voice that spoke right away was the pastor, and he said, "Okay, everybody, listen up. Here's what we're going to do." Okay. And so all the rest of us inside our blindfolds were rolling our eyes, of course, right? Because
Yeah,
this activity was revealing the most obvious thing. But
yeah,
even then, I'm not sure, until the facilitator talked about it, I'm not sure he would have noticed.
yeah.
And so all of that's to say, he never had any malintent from wanting to be the one to have ideas. That was just the way he felt he was able to contribute. The thing is, sometimes the way that we feel called to contribute prevents other people from having space to feel like they can contribute too. And when we decide to create a congregation or a community, it's important that we find ways, in spite of what our particular navigation into the process might be, that we find ways to hear other voices and to invite other ideas and to be open. So it's helpful for us to figure out what our strengths are in those ways, and even to have conversations in quiet ways with our colleagues to help them be aware of what our needs are to be able to contribute, and maybe some of the things that help me understand why you always answer your own questions before we have a chance to, there are ways of asking those kinds of questions to help us reveal one another's values. Another thought comes to mind from another pastor I worked with, and his wife had been a music minister vocationally, and then she went to become a priest, and so in an Episcopal church. And so he told me, he said they had a lot of conversations about why there are always so many difficulties between pastors and music ministers. And so I was pretty young then, but I remember very clearly what he said. He said, clergy always think that musicians have no theology, and musicians always think that pastors have no taste, and he was being tongue in cheek and funny in a way.
Yeah.
But I can see the fingerprints of that, to be honest, in my own life, where I feel deficient because here I was, a conservatory student, never had any training in religion or theology at all. But suddenly, because I had the gifts to play a particular instrument, I was supposed to understand how to deal with all those other things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, pastors have not spent the time I did knowing if the song has a good melody or not. And so how could I expect them suddenly to, after probably even less training in their field than we have in ours, to know all the things that I've come to know? And so I think when we're aware, potentially even in a silly way, of one another's potential shortcomings, his reason for articulating that was not to limit either of us, but just to say we can actually help each other. And if we trust each other, and if we don't necessarily become defensive to our own territory, if we work together to create this holy ground, right, that we get to share. And so those are just a couple examples of that have helped me kind of frame my way of thinking about working with people who don't dwell in this same topic that I do in my mind and in my heart, day after day, minute after minute, so.
When you come to like a worship planning meeting, whether it be for just this Sunday coming up or for looking at a whole year, are there things that you do to prepare for that conversation, to make yourself open to the ideas of other people, or to make the needs that you think that the texts and your choirs need to sing, so that they're represented? Are there ways that you sort of go into these situations with a sense of calm and purpose ahead of time, so that might reduce some of that conflict going into it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a really interesting situation here in the church. I'm sitting in my church office here, but at First Plymouth, we do a lot less worship planning collectively than I've experienced in any of the other places that I've worked before. So it's been peculiar. I remember the first conversation I had with the pastor here, who's still here now. He said, well, you're probably used to getting together with clergy and trying to make all the things in the service fit together in a particular way. And I said, yeah, that was what I was used to. And at that point, I really loved doing that. I've had a lot of joy in doing that. But well, he said, that's all fine. But, when people watch a 30-minute sitcom, they're able to track 3 storylines at a time. And so I don't necessarily think that all of the things that we do in one given service have to necessarily come to things from the same perspective or to articulate the same story, because if it's great content, it may get to the heart or mind of somebody who might have gotten missed if we were only coming from the same point of view. And at first, that was confounding to me, what he was saying, because it seemed like, how could we ever narrow our ideas? But in the meantime, because I've been here for 17 years and have gotten used to that, it's very freeing in a way. The good part is there's no pressure at the last minute of trying to make something fit either. And some funny things happen from time to time where we might sing something that really doesn't seem to jive. One I remember, I think I mentioned this to you before, but one that I remember was he was preaching a sermon, which, by the way, our pastors don't decide the scriptures and sermons until the Tuesday before of the weekend that it happened. So there's no way we could prepare a choir, and they understand that. There's no way we could prepare all the details of instruments. Anyway, the choir was going to sing the credo from the Gospel Mass by Robert Ray, which starts with "I believe, I believe, I believe." You know, as a sort of, but the sermon was about, it's more important to have faith than to have beliefs. And so as soon as it was over, the choir sang, "I believe, I believe." There was no pressure from that this didn't fit, but in a way it does fit, you know, because the message was not that we shouldn't believe certain things, but it was that even if we believe a little, and have the faith to grow into what our beliefs are, we can believe that little with a lot of oomph, you know. And so there there are ways of even those places of potential tension or the things that don't line up. But I think having a lot of positive ideas to show excitement about the things that we think would be life-giving and helpful to the community for some reason or other, bringing ideas that show different, that create different sound worlds and different colors and textures. I think those are important things for a music minister to ponder, as much as how fancy the composer list is or how impressive the repertoire is, because when we think more about this type of environment that we're trying to create week after week, and the diversity and flow of energy in the services, to me that's something that can get overlooked in some ways if we don't continue to think about it. So those tend to be the things I would bring. And here, I don't know how many of our friends that are watching and listening, but here, if there's some particular thing I find interesting and intriguing, the pastors are sometimes open to doing something around that instead of always the opposite. So that's to say, if we think that music in the liturgy can be an act of preaching and kind of lifting up the word, right? Then sometimes it doesn't matter when necessarily what the cart and the horse is. Everything is working together for good, you know. And we have the challenge of going through all this content across the ages and space and time to figure out what we might do. And because I preach some too, I realize how difficult it is for our pastors who have to think about something from their own heart each and every week to bring to a community that so everybody has, I think, when we're aware of each other's challenges and the difficulties of one another's roles, it also helps us be a little bit more patient with one another.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. When I think about being in front of a choir at church, and I look out in the middle of rehearsal, I'm trying to track what musically is happening and where we need to fix something and what we can accomplish in our time together and how they're stressed. But I'm also cognizant that, okay, this alto has sung her entire life in collegiate choirs. She might be kind of bored by this. This tenor has just joined choir and he's nervous and he's feeling overwhelmed. And this person is like, everyone's on a different ability level. And our job is to cultivate this holy ground where everyone can sort of grow and flourish. And how do you How do you think about that? How do you think about choir rehearsals or bell rehearsals or ensembles where everyone's in a different place, maybe technically, to bring them together into something that works together?
That's an interesting thought. And I mean, yes, and there there are situations, aren't there, where sometimes we might have an accompanist with us that might not be in the same place we are with the song
Mm. Hmm.
as well, and in terms of motivating the learning process. And
Hmm.
uh, well, uh, part of what I think is important to realize is it it is something that we only do together. So that's to say, I mean, I try to imagine what if I were in choir sometimes, and it's actually sometimes I am in choir because when my colleague's leading a piece in a rehearsal, I get to sit in and be with the choir, and I love that, and I hear more there some of what you're talking about, where where there are some horses that are really getting at it, and
Yep.
there are others figuring out how to still get up in the saddle,
Yeah.
especially in particular songs that might be more familiar to some of them than others if they're newer. So, um, something that we do to try to help people who may be less confident is to provide. We always have a YouTube library that we send with all of the pieces, but also a choral tracks library that we send. So people who may have a little bit more challenge in reading notes, like it's no surprise to them what songs we're going to sing each week. So I do help with that by sending a list on Monday of all the things we'll practice on Wednesday, and that list doesn't change much from one week to another. So once they start, if they do want some extra time to prepare, they would know ahead of time what we're going to be working on.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think also, we have a kind of choir where there are some people who have scholarships to sing in the choir, who may have special kinds of vocal talents or more experience in music. There are more vocationally musicians,
Mhm.
professionally musicians, and that sort of thing. And I think they understand, like if everybody understands that their role in a choir is to help lift up the abilities of people who may not instantly be able to do what they do. In some ways, I think that's what our job is, right? Like, um, I don't think it's demeaning to have to help somebody learn a song that I can learn on my own. So why would I expect that? Uh, I think if somebody feels that way in the choir, it's more their attitude probably than it is, and perhaps reframing this. This is a collective expression of faith, so we want to be sure to hear everyone's voice. Something I do find myself saying sometimes that I think makes a difference is I'll say if you feel like you have a big voice, you're doing enough right now. If you feel like you have a smaller voice, there's actually a bigger voice you could bring to this section of the song.
Mhm.
And suddenly that'll change some people who may feel smaller in the choir to know that they have permission, as much permission as the more confident singers around them, that we want to hear their voice in the sound too. And
Mhm.
that's something that's always been important to me, is that this would be a place, not that people have to kind of um, hide behind a certain weakness or limitation that they may feel, but a place where they can fully express with whatever voice they have. That it not be a place of conformity, but it be a place of uniform permission to express in your voice. Nobody can sing the same way as somebody else.
Mhm.
But in your unique voice, you can choose to sing a particular vowel or dynamic or consonant in a certain way. And those are the places we come together. And those are the things you can't learn from YouTube or from the um, from the choral tracks. Those are the things that help us create a sense of belonging and to create a freedom in the choir.
Mhm. Absolutely. What do you? This is just occurring to me now. What do you think your voice is? Like, if you were been talking about the singers' voices, bringing their voices, and that's their contribution. They're going to sing this anthem. They're going to present themselves. Going to be with people. You, as the music minister, do you have a concept of what your voice is? Is it the raising up of the people around you? Is it proclaiming praise to God with these people? Does that change throughout the year?
Well, I think what I hope it would be is helping people chip away the things. Well, let's see. So I know the answer, but I can't quite figure out how to say it. Something I really believe is when we grow as a musician, nothing is added to us from outside of ourselves. But what happens when we grow as a musician is the things that are already born in us and alive in us, we free them, and more of the good, beautiful things come out, whether that literally be in our singing, or whether that be in the way we can play the organ, or whether that be in the way that we conduct, or whether that. So I think what I hope happens uh, in the music I would make is to empower people to be more compelled to give the message of the song, to worry less about their voice, and to think more about whatever their voice is, whatever it can do for the message of that song in that moment. And so what I hope that does musically is it would be that our choir doesn't sound the same on every song that we sing, because it's not about the voice of the choir, but the voice of the choir becomes the instrument through which these different expressions of faith can emerge. And on any given day, somebody might be singing the most joyful song they've ever sung. They might not be feeling joy on the inside, but by singing it, they rehearse that emotion and remember what that feels like. That can be really valuable. And similarly, we can become more aware of, we can become more empathetic when we sing a song of longing the day after we got a promotion at our job, you know? Um, and all of those are honest things. If we can help the singer get out of the way of thinking what's right and wrong, and more into what is the song trying to say, what are the words trying to help us experience. And I would hope that's what's, as a composer, that's what I hope I would write as, in the way that I play music. I hope that it's to bring out what the song's about and what it could bring out in us. And that's actually a lot of, I think, what I also represent around the staff table, is to remember that that the worship that we have is a collective human time of human expression. It's not an event. You know, it's not a presentation, although I don't think there's anything awful about presentations or events, but that it's more personal than that. You know, no matter how big it is, it's more personal than that from the individuals that make it big. So
yeah. Do you ever have to say you're sorry to choir people or to clergy people? Like, I've had to say, I I didn't teach this with enough time. You were doing fantastic. Please, I apologize for this. Here's how we're going to make this better,
mhm.
so we can sing together confidently and we'll know better for next time. Or how do you are the times that you feel it's really important to praise things, like to say to your colleague, "Thank you so much for the ways that your children came and helped lead worship." Are there intentionalities that you try to bring for giving thanks and gratitude or apologies to people?
I love that you asked that. Yeah, and that's really all really important. I would rather be quick to say I'm sorry than be right and feel bad on the inside. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think I can never imagine that the 60 or 70 people that come on a Wednesday night have any desire to be there to do something that makes me upset, you know? And
Yeah.
so if that were to happen, I think I need to remember to look in the mirror and decide that I'm imposing that rather than
Yeah.
that it's being put upon me. And so reframing, part of that is to say, if there is something that's frustrating that we might have to apologize for, what can we do to help people feel the opposite of that? How would we know how to make it feel good, you know? Um, and what does that feel like, so that we know that's what we're working towards. Um, and that, having said that, I think there are times we have to be honest if there are things that are disappointing and discouraging. I know in my early years here, we had to have some difficult conversations, less about music, but more about the way some of the people were treating each other, just as we were creating a new culture that wouldn't allow that to happen that way anymore, you know? I remember telling the choir once that I don't know how this came to my mind, but there were three kinds of choir members. You know, there was the peacock that would come and say, "Oh, I sang with Sir David, and I've been in the choir so long, and we're so wonderful. And you have to be sure when we process in, you do this." And there's nothing wrong with being proud of the beautiful thing that you're a part of, until it prevents somebody else from being able to be a part of it at all, you know. And then there was a porcupine who, no matter what, somebody took my music, somebody's sitting in my seat. I don't like that exercise because you're asking us to move around. We don't move around in this choir, you know. She doesn't have a pencil, you know, that all of those sorts of things. Just that prickly. And then there's the sparrow who just decides to do everything they can to be a part of the choir and to make everybody else realize they can be too. And I would just as soon have a lot of sparrows in the world. We have an awful lot of the others right now, don't we? If we think about it. And so it's there was something else you said that I wanted to, about gratitude. One thing that I think is important is to write notes to people. I do that a fair amount, and I haven't done this the last couple of years, but I used to go to I'll probably get to do it this summer. The summers that I get to go to a conference instead of have to work at one. And in the off time, I've written thank you notes and to all the people in the choir. Not for any particular thing, although I usually can think of some particular thing to mention for each person. But, you know, think about how you would feel or how you do feel when somebody takes the time to write you a personal note. That makes a difference, doesn't it? And the same thing can be true for our colleagues. You know, if you do hear your pastor do a great sermon, why not let them know that? Why not send them a note and tell them that it may be true that you didn't like the last 3 or 4, you know, and you don't have to necessarily say that every time, but when there's
Thank you for not preaching the last 3 sermons again. Yeah.
When there's a genuine, authentic way to affirm even a challenging person, I think it's helpful to remember to do that, and you can build from there. Right.
Yes, sparrow. So lovely.
Well, and I think that's another thing. We shouldn't blame the choir members for being for being the peacocks and the porcupines, right? Because as leaders, a lot of times we are the peacocks and the porcupines.
Yeah.
And we can be all of them at once if we're not careful too, you know. And so you get to there's that concept of mirror neurons, right? That people will start to feel the space that's being held for them and fill in and emulate that. Speaking, I think this fits to the topic. I don't love sarcasm in music making either. Certainly things that are angry and diminishing, no, but even that I think can become a slippery slope. What good does it really do? There are lots of ways of being playful and fun without being sarcastic and without feeling you have to put even sideways someone else or something else down. And so I think that's important. And there are sometimes people will ask things, how do you deal with a problem choir member, you know? And I think the worst way is to do it in front of everyone, and to then mess up, instead of to invite that person to have a quiet conversation, possibly with someone else if you're more comfortable inviting another colleague or friend to that conversation.
Mhm.
But doing nothing at all is not very thoughtful, honestly, because if you think of it this way, if you didn't realize what a difficult person you were being, wouldn't you want somebody to sit down with you and let you know so that you could maybe do it differently? Now they may decide they don't want to do it differently and be upset, but at least you at that point they've made a decision
Yeah, yeah,
instead of
absolutely.
just don't know. And so
Yeah.
um
I
that's
think when someone comes up in a peacock or a porcupine manner to me, um, I think my first thought process might be like, oh, like they need to be seen somehow. This is important to their identity that they're taking up this space, that they are um, wanting to be heard, and maybe they don't feel like they're being heard. And so I wonder if the idea of talking to them in a different context is a way of showing that you are seen. I do see you. Like your feathers or your spikes are. Um, I do notice them, and you're more than that. And that's a way of nurturing those sorts of conversations that aren't confrontational. They don't have to. You don't also have to throw up your plumage. You can redirect that. It's hard to do
well,
in the moment, though. Yeah,
yeah, no,
yeah,
it's a good point though. And
yeah.
the part of that is to say, um one of the hard truths of things, I think, our lives and our ministries are not about us ultimately, and if we're willing to admit that, it helps us let go a little bit more of some of the places we feel we fail, and we can forgive ourselves and move on. And I think it also, you know, it's easy to get into this habit of week after week judging ourselves. Um, oh, that didn't go well. This piece didn't go well. That piece. When we think on that week to week basis, it can be debilitating there because the weeks never stop. But if instead we have the patience and perhaps to some extent the wisdom to think about, in the last 3 years, has something good transpired that makes this a stronger community than it was 3 years ago? And you know what? If the answer to that is yes, you can forget about Helen missing the C and C sharp on the anthem and the bells on Sunday. That's gonna be gone almost as soon as it's done. You know,
Mhm.
but the idea of how we grow over time, that is something that carries on, and the culture can kind of open up.
Yeah.
So
I had a handbell choir once, and it was the time change Sunday. So someone came in an hour late, but she made it right in time for the bells, and so she was hurrying. She got up there and she had reversed her two handbells. So Amazing Grace was he had these two notes transposed the whole time. And oh well, she made it. She was committed. She rang them enthusiastically, and it's a great story. And in
yeah,
the moment, it passed.
well,
That's okay.
and I think something to mention that is important. A lot of the things that confound us can be when we confuse what humility is. Um, that when we think of when we confuse humility with self-deprecation, and that's not what it is. Uh, I want to share with you the C.S. Lewis says about humility. It was true humility is not thinking less of yourself; it's thinking of yourself less. So
Mhm.
that being humble doesn't mean hiding your gifts and your talents and your excitement and your joy and your ways of expressing. That's a way of expressing your humility when it's not just offered so that people remember you, but they remember, again, how did you make them feel? What did you use those? Uh, how did you use those gifts? And I think those are sacred gifts that God gives us to employ, And so um, kind of related to that, we have a pastor that often says, you wouldn't worry so much what people think about you if you realized how infrequently they think about you at all, and that's helpful too, is that when we stop putting all the pressure on ourselves and wonder what people think of us, and instead we let the work that we're doing be what connects us, then suddenly it's not as much about us. It's more about this thing that happens in between on the holy ground that we started talking about. That to me is where the special things that I experience actually happen. And I don't feel like I can control those, but I feel like we create a culture and an environment that allows for those to be more possible,
Yeah. Oh, that's
if that's,
beautiful.
yeah.
So, okay, so to wrap up, let's say you're going to till and tend your holy ground, and you're allowed to take some tools with you from your um, psychological musical tool chest. What are you going to bring to your garden in order to till that holy ground?
Yeah, a lot of it, I think, metaphorically and practically is listening, isn't it? If we think of that our job as a song leader is more about making instead of listening, we're going to be in big trouble. A quick story to answer this question, but I was visiting a church that was built like refurbishing their organ, and they were in the midst of the project, and the organ builder was there, and he picked up one of the pipes. It was clear that all the in that rank were on the ground, and he picked one up and he looked at it and he said, we're still trying to figure out what these pipes want to do. He wasn't saying we can't get these pipes to do what we want them to do. And I think too many of us come to music ministry of trying to get these pipes to do what we want them to do, whether that be a certain song or whether that be a certain sound or whether that be in working with our colleagues of a certain way we think things have to be, instead of figuring out based on the gifts and talents that we actually have and the time that we actually have and the space that we actually have and the instruments that we actually have, what can be the most beautiful thing that can emerge here? Instead of thinking, how does that compare with the one I saw on the live stream from the church I admire down the street? So that becomes important, I think, in my way of thinking about it, of what is the voice of the community and how can I listen and allow that to emerge? How can I be open? Here's another word. How can I be open to allowing those things to happen instead of being inflexible and thinking about what I thought I was supposed to do?
Yeah, John has a good question here. What do you think about this differently in rehearsal and in worship?
That's a good question, but I think I don't necessarily. I kind of pull it all together. That some of the most worshipful moments of my life have been in the choir room when nobody was watching. Well, hopefully the choir might have been watching, I guess, but
Yeah.
but yeah, I think no, I think that just being aware that again, God is present in the communion, in the time we spend together, and trying not to get in the way of that. And it's so easy for that to happen because we're inspired. I remember being in a rehearsal with the conductor once. We were singing the creation. There was a lot of people singing, and the poor pianist was playing to accompany on the upright piano, and he was pounding and pounding, trying to get everybody to stay together. And he was shouting at the top of his lungs at us, "Sing lighter, everybody! Sing lighter!" And the point of that was, you can't hit and shout people into doing the opposite of what they're seeing and hearing. I mean, maybe you can, but is it real? Is it authentic? Is their spirit really lighter when you shout them into it? I don't know that it is. I've never seen that. I've never seen affirmation that it is. And so, in in rehearsal or in worship, it should feel the same. It should feel like there's freedom in whether you know the song completely or partly, that there's freedom to invest fully in that as you're learning and as you're more learned down the way. So
it seems like you're always looking for these possibilities, not just the negatives. It's not fixing and making, it is looking for ways to grow, and that's your orientation.
yeah, I mean, I rarely tell people some negative without being sure that they would understand what it would take to have a positive. And to be sure that you don't stop right away until they felt what it's like for it to be more positive, you know, and to be clear that's another thing perhaps to say in this conversation is to be specific about what would be good. You know, like we can really die in generalizations in our relationships with people and on our staff and also with our choirs. But when we're specific, then suddenly there are more ways that people know that they're achieving or unifying or uniting or connecting, right? If we do have a shared understanding of what that vowel is or what that phrase is or what that line is. So I was just reading the screen here too while you're
yeah, that's a great question if you wanted to address that.
yeah. No, we definitely don't have auditions here. And part of what I think can help is one of the things that can, there are lots of things that can help. One of the things would be to think about where people are seated in the room. We don't have auditions. We don't require people to sing on their own, but I do seat the choir twice each year. And so everybody in the section sings with 2 or 3 other people at a time. And we move them around to create the greatest sound. Some of them were scared the first time we did it, but then they simply realized it was because we cared enough about hearing all of their voices, and we wanted to have them seated in such a way that we could hear everyone's positive contribution to the collective sound, and that's pretty affirming when you think about it. So that could be something. Certainly, if someone's really struggling, it wouldn't hurt to say, would you be willing to spend some time with me since you're new to the choir? I'd love to. I'd love to have a chance to get to know more about you and your voice, and you could do some experimenting with them, give them at least that opportunity. Someone might say no, I realize that, but they might also say yes. I certainly have had students that I could describe the way you did and saw real transformation. And I know eventually how much the music experience, how much value there was for them. And honestly, they didn't, the value it added to them, to their life and their experience, I think outweighed the potential little bit of negative it might have added to whatever I thought the sound should have been, you know, that why wouldn't we want to share this gift to something that means so much to us with more and more people, even if they're not quite as good as somebody else at it, you know? Who are we to rob that of someone? And so that's something I really believe. Oh yeah, no, yes. So there are situations, aren't there, where there are people in our choirs that need a lot of support, potentially physical support moving around. Potentially they're not sure what page we're on most of the time. And a lot of those people tend to be some of the most beloved people in the choir. And I think there's probably always going to be somebody in the choir that is especially going to be on the lookout for that person. But certainly, again, I think to try to be inclusive sometimes is hard. That's something we have to realize. It's not supposed to be easy. There are a lot of communities that are inclusive on a banner, but that aren't really willing to do it in the difficult ways when time comes. We've had members of the choir here who are unsighted, so you know we do tons and tons of anthems, and that's a lot of things to get prepared on their Braille scores. But was it worth doing? Absolutely. I can tell you, even we had a young man, Chase, who sang with us for years before he moved to Chicago, and so many people would write to us from the live streams and talk about how impactful it was to see Chase singing in the choir and his giant book of pieces that he was reading from, and so no, and at the same time, a lot of us who do this work, it's not true for me, but a lot of us who do this work, we have 5 or 10 hours a week that we're supposed to do it, right? And so I realize it's impossible, but again, what we might spend those 10 hours a week for, if we're doing something with those 10 hours, it's not ultimately about affirming the humans that are doing it with us and helping them become more spiritually alive, to feel more hope, to feel more empowered to express their faith, then maybe those hours should be spent on something else. If we're willing to look in the mirror and say, is it I, Lord? How can we use the time we have to do the most good? Becomes the ultimate question, doesn't it? I can't remember ever asking someone to step away from the choir. I think there have been people that have struggled enough that they've decided that they've made that decision. But I can understand that the possibility of that happening. One of the things that we have here, which is potentially a possible model, is we have two different we have 3 different, but we have 2 different adult choirs that don't have any auditions. One is more rigorous and a little bit more demanding in terms of schedule, the amount of time they have to spend, the amount of repertoire we do, the amount of services we sing. And the other one is more casual in all those ways. And so a lot of people self-select because it's easier when you struggle, in particular, musically in some ways, it's easier to do a little bit less stuff and have more time to prepare it than it is to do a lot of stuff and have less time to prepare it. And so would it be conceivable for there to be an opportunity like that in certain churches that don't have that kind of opportunity yet? And there are things those 2 groups can do together too, but that they're not in opposition at all, but they're just providing different kinds of environments and comfort zones to try to be more inclusive.
Tom, David, we could go on forever, I think. And there is some great conversation happening in the chat, especially participants helping each other, dealing with folks that have dementia in the choir and what their strategies have been. So that has been just very heartening to see and to hear, and positioning stronger people next to weaker people, all kinds of wonderful ideas. I want to put up Sherry's comment here before we conclude, because wholeheartedly agree that this has been a really important conversation. It's very easy for all of us to get so caught up in that definition of success that we may particularly have, rather than thinking about it in the communal ways that the 2 of you have been talking, and so that infusion of grace into this ministry has been much appreciated. Just again, as we close, I want everybody to know that this is a recorded webinar. There will be an on-demand version of it available to you to share. David, Tom, do you have any closing thoughts before we move on here?
Well, again, thank you for inviting me to this. I don't know that I felt like I was an expert on this particular topic, but I think it's important to say caring about people is not a small thing. It doesn't come up at the top of most of our job descriptions. There's a lot of more trivial stuff, frankly, that happens in those way before that. But I just want to lift up how essential that is, especially in in this particular time. So thanks to all of you for sharing this time and for all the good care that you give to people in your communities, and how valuable that is.
Well, very good. I am going to put up a kind of a closing slide that'll have a QR code on it that you can scan. It'll take you right to the Serving Through Song page. We don't have the button up quite yet for the on-demand recording, but there is a button there that you can click and find some really wonderful discounts, 15% off some select pieces, free shipping. David, you want to mention any of the things that are in that list of discounts?
In that list, we have a couple of things that are about caring for your choir. Preaching to the Choir by Wayne Wold, reflections that you could open or close rehearsals with, and then some of Tom's pieces that are born out of this idea of how do we bring beauty and truth and wonder to the world through his music that you could try with your own choirs. Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. Thank you, David.
My pleasure.
Thank you.